All right, Zoom says that we are live. So if that's the case, then today is Thursday, December 26th. And this is a weekly check-in on development tasks for Backdrop CMS. Before we get started on reviewing core issues, I did want to thank two people for creating contributed project releases this week. We have a new stable release of aggregator module, which was a module that was in Drupal 7 core, pulled out of Backdrop core because most websites don't use it, but it is still a very useful module. So we have it in contrib, has now a stable release. And we have another one called Mail Disguise that I don't think I've used before, but I have a feeling this is an email address obfuscator that will make it so that emails don't get stolen and spammed at, I guess. On the website, I think last week when we had a meeting, we talked about the problems we were having with MailChimp charging us money, and we decided to use a web form to collect email addresses before CiviCRM was set up. But when I put a web form embedded form on backdropcms.org, I was not able to style it. It came with a white background I couldn't get rid of. So I switched to a service called MailJet, which Nate recommended. He actually uses them for webform.com. And they provided embeddable form that you could customize inline HTML on. So you could remove things you didn't want and you could add things you did want. So I was able to get that styled appropriately and plunked in. Additional benefit, it also already has the GDPR checkbox as part of its default embed form. And that was something we were working on adding to MailChimp also. So I think that's going to be a good holdover until we get CiviCRM set up. It also has much higher limits than MailChimp. MailChimp has limits on the size of your mailing list, where MailJet has limits only on the number of emails you send. And the limit on MailChimp was 2,000, MailJet it's 6,000. So I think there's no way we're going to hit the minimum requirement on MailJet. So if we needed to send emails before CiviCRM was ready, we can use MailJet to do that too. So I think it's a great holdover. And if we have to use it, it would work for that also. So that form is up on backdropcms.org, along with a newer version of the Borg theme that handles the style for the new form. I want to put that new version of the Borg theme on both the forum site and the API site so we can get this sign-up form on there. And I'm planning on doing that today. Great, so that's it for our own website stuff. There are a couple of other issues that are getting worked on our site. I would encourage people to check the issue queue if you want to help on those. There's been a bunch of activity on our sites lately. I think, Tim, ever since your sprint, people have been a lot more motivated to fix stuff, so it's been great. So yeah, I'd love to continue that habit.
So quickly on that, you pushed some changes that weren't, the config wasn't synced. Have you synced that since then, or?
I think so.
Like a week ago, you pushed some code, but the config wasn't synced, and I didn't feel like I could do that. It was because there was a bunch of stuff I didn't recognize.
Oh, so there were some weird changes in config. There was a new content type and new fields that were added for the notifications on the dashboard. And I didn't sync any of that because I wasn't sure if it was ready or not. Is it ready?
Well, okay. I thought the reason we pushed it was so that we could test it on.
Oh, I thought, so I pushed changes to the view because I thought that's what we wanted, but it didn't create a new content type.
Okay, well, we can't do
Is that part of the same change?
Yes, we can't do the view is of the content of that content type. So
yeah, well, we had a view up there before though, where we just wanted the keys changed, right? So we already had a content type.
Okay.
I don't know. Anyway, I got cold feet, so I synced everything except for the content type. But maybe you and I can touch base after this and make sure that this and all it's all on there. So if we decide it's ready, all we just have to do is hit the sync button. So
got it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's turn it over to Nate to talk about 114.3 and beyond.
All right. So let's see. So 114.3 will be our next bug fix release. At this point, 114.3 will probably come out the same time as 115, which is only in about, that'll be 20 days, 19 days, 20 days. And so the bug fixes that we'll get in here, there's a bunch of them in the milestone, things that are worth noting during the meeting though. This lingering issue that we're having that is causing test failures, it's 4180, that has to do with the time of day at which the pull request is filed. Sometimes it will cause the tests to fail in this one issue. Gregory updated this a little over a week ago. It looks like is this still just in a state where it just needs review? I think you were trying to get an approval from IndigoZilla. Did that happen?
Not necessarily from him. So there was another issue that he sort of like discovered, so more like a use case that we weren't covering, but this is a pre-existing issue. So what happened is with the security release that came out, we already released the fix that's not fixing this. So we had merged the commit already, and I was hoping that this would not happen. So around mid-November or end-November, I started working. So I reopened this issue. This issue was closed and I reopened it. So now we have it milestone that under 114.3. And I think as it is, it's good to go because it solves the problem. And the use case that IndigoZilla found out, I think it can go on a separate issue.
Oh yeah, I see on November 20th, they said, let's give your approach a try in the pull request, which I
Yeah.
hadn't seen because it wasn't in the issue. Okay, great. Okay, so that looks like it's probably ready to give a shot. It is somewhat encouraging that this pull request that you filed passed all the tests. So,
I actually tested it manually on my local as well, simulating hours before and after hours being before and after midnight. So it still passes. The culprit seemed to be that we were doing custom PHP math instead of using already existing like function
Date
provided
math.
native ones. Yeah.
Did you manage to reproduce the failure on your local?
Yes.
Oh,
So
well, that's
and
something.
Yes, and this is how I discovered that IndigoZella's fix wasn't actually fixing it.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, most excellent. So that's issue 4180. Sounds like that one, it says it needs review, but it sounds like it's probably ready to go at this point. Like a lot of these quote random test failures, like the best way to figure out if we fix it is to merge it usually and then see over a period of time if the problem has been resolved. Okay, great. Let's see. We also, go ahead, Greg.
No, it's no more than like a dozen sort of like lines of code of change. So if you check yourself as well, you'll see that the changes are pretty trivial. And then I did incorporate one of the proposals that IndigoZilla made with regards to using default system time zone for that that check. We were using Europe Moscow back then, and I don't see why. The test before it actually does check whether the time zone is set to a specific time zone, and we use Berlin for that. So it needed to stay, but for this one, I think it's more, it will catch more cases if it runs on the whatever the time zone is from the server.
Interesting. Okay. I'm just noticing some string changes in here, like to event remaining 1 day, like just that string doesn't make any sense at all. So, okay, never mind. Okay.
Yes. Oh, the string changes. Yes, it was really weird. I don't know why that was there before, and I think it's the same in Drupal if it has the same test.
Yeah, that's very strange. Okay, let's see. So another issue of note is issue 3873. Number fields can't be left empty. If you create a number field and just don't set a default and then save the form, then it can cause a fatal error, which can then lose the content that was in your form. So that issue has been RTBC. That's on my plate to get that merged as soon as possible. Let's see. BW Panda, who was in the meeting earlier but had to drop out before we started, has pushed up a new issue that he would like prioritized, issue 4151. A fairly minor thing as far as most people are concerned, that install.sh, the script that we use when doing testing, and sometimes people use it locally as well to install Backdrop like as in a one-liner. It doesn't support multi-site currently. And so he's got a pull request to fix that under issue 4151. So that currently needs review. Okay, that's it. For the things that we talk about in 114.3, there's a whole bunch of other issues in the milestone. Check it out on GitHub to see a list of all of those possible issues. I'm going to take a look at this real quick and see. Oh, I was hoping I could RTBC. Milestones. Okay, two of which in that milestone are currently RTBC. So one of them is that numeric fields, and the other one is UI for watchdog severity levels. So great, I'll try to get through those today or tomorrow. My holiday schedule is pretty open, and so I'm hoping we'll be able to make some progress here in the next couple of days. Because I know reviewing has been a bottleneck on a lot of stuff. So let's move on to 115. 115 is the next minor version. It will be coming out January 15th with the feature freeze on January 1st. Before the broadcast started, we were talking about scheduling and the way that sometimes feature freeze gets pushed out by another day. That happens when a holiday lands on a weekend, and then the observed holiday is like on Monday or something like that, and that causes the feature freeze to be pushed out another day because we end feature freeze at the end of holidays. This year, January 1st is on Wednesday, which means that the end of the holiday will actually be on the 1st. So the feature freeze will be January 1st. It won't be pushed out any additional time this year. So let's see, things that we're working on. So add an image library modal to image fields, issue 3297. Lauren is our advocate for this issue, but he's not around this week. I reviewed this pull request earlier today, though. It needs some work. There's some UI issues that everybody can see while working on it, but I also think that there's like the implementation here is not quite where we want it to be. What I'll try to do is push this forward a little bit, I think, in a way that I'd like to see it go, where it'll end up looking a little bit more like file field sources, like pulling some code out of that to make it so that we'll be creating less overall visual changes on the file field widget that will also be used by image field to just allow opening up the dialog. But then all of the dialog code that Graham72 has written, like that stuff is all good. And that's the, like, of oddly, of all things that file field sources does, it doesn't have a modal for selecting an image, which is like the one thing that we actually care about. So I'm hoping we'll be able to pull code from file field sources to use its kind of more minimalist UI and the way that its API works, but use the dialog code that Graham72 has been putting together to use or pre-select an image from a dialog. So that's kind of where that is right now. Let's move on to the next issue, auto menu settings in core. This is BW Panda's issue that just simply allows you to create a menu link when you're creating a new piece of content. That I merged earlier today because it had been RTBC for a couple of weeks. Looks great. Gregory, I was looking for an issue today that you said in a file that a follow-up could potentially be disabling the menu settings, but leaving the default menu item in place, kind of like we do for sticky and what's the other one? Sticky and
Published.
and promote. Yeah, you can turn those options on, but then hide them from the node form. And I was looking around for an issue that was like allowed disabling of the menu settings, which I think would actually be the same thing, that if you just disabled all the menu settings, but you set a default, then you would accomplish what you're describing. But I couldn't find an issue for disabling the menu settings, which surprised me because that's one of my pet peeves.
Okay. So maybe I've mentioned in that ticket that I will file one, or didn't.
Yeah, you said that it should be a follow-up, but there wasn't a link to anything. And I wasn't sure if there already was an issue that was like disable the menu settings, because if there was, then I think that would be the same thing.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take a look at that. It was merged, you said, right?
Yep.
All right, cool. I'll file a follow-up.
Yeah, because what I would like to have happen is, and we can discuss this once the issue is opened, is that I think only the page content type should have menu settings by default, and the blog content type, post, when you create a new post, there shouldn't be an option to put it in the menu by default, because like we're just filling up the form, like the vertical tabs, with stuff that is probably unnecessary. And menu settings is one thing you can't disable right now, which is silly because there's lots of content types that people set up that will never ever be in a menu.
Okay, yeah. So you mean besides adding that possibility, also making it be off by default for the rest of the content types being post? Okay, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Or wait, am I getting things confused? Is that already possible? And it's comments that you can't turn off.
Oh, I think menu. You can move on, and I'll check it in the meantime. I'll just file a demo site really quick just to double check.
Yeah, now I'm like, oh, well, maybe I'm talking about something that doesn't even exist.
I know you can't turn off comments. Cool.
Oh, it's comments. Menus already have that ability. Yay, great.
What's the follow-up then?
What can't you do
Is
with
it set by
comments?
default?
So comments, the vertical tab is always on when
Okay.
you're creating a piece of content, no matter what. There's no way to turn it off whatsoever. And so I'm getting it backwards. I want the ability to turn off comments on pages out of the box.
Okay.
Because
Entirely, not by default. So we can set a default value that won't have them, but there's no way to say never ever allow comments on any page content type.
Got it. Yeah,
Right.
that hadn't occurred to me.
yeah, okay, that's
Although
what I was
I have-
thinking.
I have advocated for making the default to be comments off. Right now it's on, and I don't know. That's another topic.
Yeah, interesting.
Usually blog posts may have comments, like the most common case is that you allow people to comment on your blogs. I don't think that any about us page or like single
Right.
page.
Thing is, every content type you make, by default, comments are on, and 99% of the time you end up turning them off.
Yeah. Even on blog, like I've had a bunch of blog sites where my site owners were like, can you please turn off comments on all my blog posts because I'm tired of moderating. So
So
even
I
on
always
blog sites,
forget to do that, and then I post my first node, and there's comments, so I have to turn it off on that node, and I have to go back and turn it off as the default.
Yeah.
And it just seems kind of silly, but anyways.
Yes, so page comments are closed by default, but we need to find a way to just sort of like disable that tab so it's not there,
Right.
basically.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. If we want to run down that path, if comments would be disabled by default, then that sounds like comment module should just be turned off. You know?
I don't know, because if we have both a page and a post and we want them enabled on a post, we need to have the comment module turned on in order to have that. We just want it off for every new content type.
Oh, is that what you were saying, Tim? Or you're saying you
That's
want
what I
to
was suggesting, yeah. Just have it
Oh,
off by
okay.
default, not turn it off completely.
turn it off by default on new content?
A new
types?
yeah, so I make a new content type, and
Oh,
the default is comments are off, and I can turn them on.
I completely agree with that. And
Yeah.
especially like,
Well, I'll do a pull request for that.
this is yet another one of those things that we run into every single time we do a course or a demo or anything like this, that
Yes.
we create a new content type called like portfolio or something like that. And then comments are on and we're like, oops.
Yep. I do
Yeah.
that every time too, yeah.
Yep. Huh.
I wasn't sure if
Funny.
that would be controversial, but if it's not, I think it's probably a simple pull request for just to change the default. So I think I
Yeah,
could.
before the merge, so I filed a quick demo, which doesn't include the merge change for the menus that we included now. If you do not tick any of the available menus when you create the content type, there is no menu tab when you actually create content.
Right. But that means that this ability to set a default but hide the menu section is a new
Is not.
feature. Yeah. So, yep. Okay. Well, I'm glad we had
Alright.
that little discussion anyway. Even though it wasn't relevant. That's why I couldn't find the issue. Is because it's already been fixed.
Started with a single follow-up, then maybe it needs to be 2 or something. But yeah.
Okay. All right. So next up, the recent news block on the dashboard, issue 3566. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. That well, Tim, why don't you give the update? Actually, that
Sure.
we have some changes that need to be deployed. It sounds like.
It's just a matter of testing the feed on backup.org, and we pushed the changes, but haven't synced all of the config changes yet. So we just need to be confident that that's all working on backup.org, and then we can finish the PR, I think, on in core, the core PR. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. So I think that Jen, I think those changes to backupcms.org that need to be imported, those config changes, like because it's adding a new content type, I don't think it'll do harm to deploy that so that we have it available for testing.
Because I already deployed it.
Oh, great. While we were
Since we
talking.
talked.
I mean, it was already there. I just had to
Yeah.
hit the sync button. And so I checked the issue, saw that we hadn't previously added a content type, which is what I was afraid of, and was like, oh, duh, it must have been like on my test site where I'd previously added one and not on the live site. But when I was doing the test locally, I was like, oh no, there's 2 content types, but it's just from a previous pull request. So
Yeah, I like the idea of the new content type because it segments that functionality off into
Yeah.
its own thing. So it'll be unlikely. We'll be able to control access to it real tightly.
I just thought we were going to get 2 because there was another one with another name on my local site, but that was from a previous iteration of the pull request. It wasn't on live, so
I
So-
see.
panic for no reason.
I think we are going to need to have a policy discussion now about what public notifications are, like what kinds of things to post there. But maybe that's an outreach discussion or in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. That'll be basically kind of dare I use the word marketing decision.
Mhm.
Okay. Great. So that apparently is deployed to backdropcms.org, which means now we can test it locally at least and try things out. So that's great. So we're fairly unblocked there. It says that it needs review currently. What?
The backdrop.org or the core pull request?
The core pull request.
So
I'm
the core
guessing.
pull request probably has to be tweaked. I don't think that's been updated.
There is a question for Nate in the issue though about the
Oh.
format. So I was just thinking, Nate, if you could look at Tim's most recent comment, he asked if that format was going to make you happy.
We've already talked about that.
Oh.
and agreed.
Never mind, there wasn't a comment in there. Anyway, I added needs review, but we can
Okay.
change that if it needs work.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Looks great.
Okay, good
Well,
deal.
I think in the backdrop.org issue queue, I actually posted the feed, what it looks like, and Nate approved it.
Okay, nice.
Go ahead.
Interesting. It's actually not quite what I thought it was, but
Oh,
might be fine.
I know
Okay,
we talked about it, Nate.
we did talk about it. Okay, so let's see. Let's move on to the next one, which is providing a way to re-enable disabled text formats, issue 1575. And I didn't look at this one extensively before the meeting, but Gregor, you had done a lot of reworking on it, and then Doc Wilmot and Jen said maybe that's too much.
Yeah. So what would be the too much thing? Just the helper functions that were added?
Yeah, so last time we talked about this, the API change was add one parameter to an existing function. And then the one place where we call it, where we don't need that or we need the other value of that parameter, we can set it. And so there would be one internal change to an existing function definition, and then one internal change to where it was called. And then all the new places we can call the function with a different value in that parameter. So the actual change to anyone else who is using that function would be super minimal. But if we're now adding 3 different functions, that anyone else who is using that function would also have to change to adapt that. And so I think it's just too much change for, I mean, I'm not sure there's anyone who contributes that's heavily leveraging the function, but expecting them to go and change to call a different function, I think is too much, where we can leave it the same and not have to have them change anything.
So how that came to be was that I was checking how we sort of like render the enabled and disabled views. And I saw that views have the respective set of such functions. We only have filter get formats, which currently what it does, it gets enabled formats. And I thought that maybe since we are introducing this new functionality of being able to retrieve disabled, enabled, both of them, maybe we needed the same functions or equivalent functions as we do for views. But what I can do is I can remove those functions and then maybe just not even use a new function, but just pull everything from config for that single page.
Well, I mean, so if we add extra parameter into the function that's like enabled equals true, then the current function doesn't change at all. And in the place where we need all of them, we can just call it with false, and we'll need a in that function, we'll need to obviously make it so that it checks to see if we need enabled or not. But then our new code can just call the existing function with a different last parameter.
Wasn't this what we did with the previous iteration though?
But we didn't change the API last time. We just called the same function, and then we wondered why all of our disabled text formats were showing up. But now we have a way to say get enabled or get disabled, where we didn't have that before.
All right, cool.
Or sorry, get enabled or get all.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It is kind of similar to what we did previously, that we added a parameter to filter formats, but it didn't work, right?
We didn't add a parameter last time.
No, we did.
This is what.
Yeah, I filed the pull request for this on September 3rd. But I can't actually remember what the problem was.
I added a comment immediately after a pull request where I'm like, isn't this going to break everything? And said why. So that explain, I don't remember what it was, but it was something about like, we're calling this function from another place and now it's going to return different results.
Right, right.
And so it needs to return the same results without the parameter added.
Yeah, that's what yeah, we did that we added a new parameter and we defaulted it to the previous behavior, but it still caused a problem.
Yes.
But it returned different results afterwards.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like we need to investigate this and then come back to it, because it's a
recommended solution in that issue too. Like when we bumped it from the release milestone, the comment was like, the solution is going to do X, and so we just need to figure out what that X was, because we I don't remember what my comment was. I don't remember what the solution was, but I know that we'd already figured it out.
Well,
problem solved.
The solution that we had during the previous minor release was actually doing that, adding the parameter, but it was failing when it came to listing the proper filters on the editor select box. And instead of working on that, we thought that maybe so the last comment from Doc Wilmer is, so we either just directly get all formats from config or create a filter get all formats function. So he did suggest to create a new at least one new function. Everything else can keep using filter formats as usual. So my goal, so that was Doc Wilmot's comment on September 10.
Mhm. Oh
So
yeah.
this is where I based my current solution. It's just that I went the going a bit ahead, like further than that, was adding a get. So I did add a get all formats, but I also added a get disabled and get enabled. So basically, the get enabled formats does the same thing as filter formats does. Sorry, filter get formats does currently. It was just sort of like I had in mind sort of like developer experience, and so at some point deprecate the vague filter formats function with the one that specifically says filter get enabled, so that people know what it does by its name. So that was my thinking. But yeah, I can. The alternative would be do what Doc Wilmot, the first bit of his suggestion that says directly get all formats from config here, which means just for rendering the page.
Yeah, I'm not not much a fan of that. Like we should have an API for getting config or for showing all filters. Not we shouldn't really ever be using config directly, except for when we're loading something in an API function or saving it in an API function.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm seeing what the issue was now is that it wasn't getting a list of formats. It's that in my version, filter format load, it changed that changed its functionality. So filter formats was fine. It was backwards compatible, but filter format load was working differently.
And we used filter format load when we wanted to render content. And so all of the content was just as like, it was a huge security issue where it just displayed everything rather than only what was enabled.
Right.
Yeah. So if we keep the same function, the filter formats function, because this is what I've done in my current pull request, I actually kept it. I made it so that it returns the same values, only the enabled formats, which is its current functionality. I just sort of like made it a wrapper function around the new filter get enabled text formats.
Did we not talk about adding a parameter to filter formats load?
Oh, no, I didn't see that, but yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, that was Doc Wilmot's comment from yesterday, is that he said, well, let's just add another parameter, filter format load as well.
Yeah. I think that's what we talked about back then too. Did you not like that approach, Nate?
No, I mean, I don't like it in general, but you know, it might be the best option we have.
Which one? Sorry, the filter format load. Add the second parameter.
Yeah, add a second parameter to filter format load. So it's a little bit weird because you'd say filter format load, and then even if it existed, it wouldn't be loaded if it was disabled. And so I find that to be weird from a developer perspective, that you would ask it to load something, and even though it existed, it wouldn't load it just because it was disabled. Like I find that to be weird.
Yeah. So
Did
this is
we check how many times filter formats load was called in core? I feel like we looked at it and it seemed like it was enough that we didn't want to change the return value of it. It
Right.
wasn't like we only called it once.
Yeah, and that's why we have filter format exists. It does return true even if it's disabled.
Well, we could add a filter formats load all or something.
Well, that's what filter formats does.
Oh,
yeah.
We don't need that.
Which, as Gregory is saying, is confusingly named because it's like filter formats. It's like, what does that do? You know, it doesn't say get all or load all or anything. It's just like, yeah.
Well, if you
Get
use
enabled.
filter as a verb, instead it was a noun or adjective. Filter the formats.
Yeah.
Yes. So,
Yeah,
because filter is also a verb and a noun as well. So, yeah. That's where it gets confusing. So yeah, part of the addition of the extra functions was that, and also I wasn't sure if I would name things like filter, get, whatever you do, text formats, or like the full thing that they are, or just call them formats. But yeah,
Yeah, even though I don't like it, the second parameter to filter format load definitely does seem like it's the most direct route. And then delay all of these deprecations and filter the function renaming and stuff like that to something else.
yeah, all right, cool. I can rework that maybe over the weekend.
Okay, let's move on. So next one is the manage file display page. Move that into the manage display page, issue 4031, follow from fieldable files that was added in 114. Jen?
All the rest of these issues are the same.
Oh yeah, there's no updates on any of them.
Yeah, no updates on managed file, no updates on signatures on packages, no updates on entity cache, and no updates on better workflow states.
Yeah.
For better workflow states, did Duckwama ask for feedback on that one?
Yeah.
He did, and I posted feedback, and there
Okay.
hasn't been another comment. I think these other ones are not likely to happen, but better workflow states, what is ultimately being asked for right now is so minimal that it's just an API enhancement to make it possible to have future revisions, that it's the most likely one to get completed, even though there haven't been any updates this week. I mean, of the remaining ones.
I'm going to change the order of these
Yeah, that sounds good.
so that we talk about that one first next.
So these other ones, manage file display, signatures on packages, and entity cache and core, are all pretty unlikely at this point. Even though entity cache and core is actually kind of ready, but it has such far-reaching repercussions potentially for adding caching like that it makes me nervous putting it in at this point in the cycle.
But that could be something we put in like early next cycle, and then we'd have the whole time to test it.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think that would be good. And I think I mentioned last week or something that we needed benchmarks on that, but I looked at the issue again, and Joseph already posted pretty good benchmarks that show a substantial improvement. And so I think we kind of have the information there as well.
So yeah, the improvements start showing being considerable when you have lots of content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like pretty substantial, like twice as fast.
Yep.
Yeah, so it definitely has some real improvements there. Let's see. I think the general. So I think let's. Do you guys have anything else you want to discuss for 115?
Was the first one, is that, how likely is that? The Edge image library modal? I'm sorry, you probably already said it.
No, I didn't. I don't know. It's pretty far away, honestly. Like looking at it and the way that it functions and the implementation, like it's not in a great place. However, out of all of these things, I think that it's really the key feature that would, be a headliner. So
Well,
what I'm hoping I'll put time into that and try to push that one forward directly. Which I hate to do that to Graham72 to take his work and just kind of heavily refactor it. I always feel like that's not as good as it would have been had I been advising him over the past 3 months. However, we did the same thing for putting date module in core, and rather than being upset or insulted as code being refactored, he was just really excited that that his work formed the basis for what ultimately happened in date module. So I'm hoping he won't take it personally, and instead just be happy that the feature that he wants, that he's really concerned about the end goal. Like the process doesn't matter so much to him as like the delivering the feature. So I think if just the fact that he was pushing the work and drawing attention to it, like will be satisfactory to him to you know, not feel too bad when I come along and rework a bunch of stuff.
Sure.
That's funny. Even Google said it just searched for satisfactory to him, which is weird. Oh, these devices. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, it's gonna be a stretch, but we're gonna do what we can.
Sure.
Okay. This Q&A, I think we discussed last meeting about this recipe and bulk config imports. So do you guys have anything else that you guys would like to discuss?
I would like to ask for some advice on that issue, but we could do it after the meeting. It's more of just me, and I have been working on it sort of as a contrib things, and I'd just like to get some advice on the
Okay.
next steps. Should we do that after the call, or?
Yeah, we're already at the hour mark, so let's call it a meeting.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody out there for watching and listening, and thanks you guys for joining the meeting. And yeah, we've got kind of our last couple of days here in the 115 cycle, so we'll do what we can before January 1st.
Yep.
Okay. Bye everybody out there.